I always believed that family was sacred, the one constant in a world of variables. Growing up in the sprawling Montgomery estate on the outskirts of Boston, I was taught that blood was thicker than water, that family loyalty trumped all else. My father, Richard Montgomery, had built his real estate empire from nothing, and he reminded us of this fact at every family dinner. "Montgomery blood is special," he would say, swirling his whiskey. "We take care of our own." How ironic those words would seem years later. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother James and my younger sister Catherine. James was groomed from birth to take over Montgomery Developments, Harvard Business School, followed by a carefully orchestrated ascent through company ranks. Catherine, the baby and only girl, was father's undisputed favorite, indulged and protected from any unpleasantness that might disturb her delicate sensibilities. And then there was me, Eleanor. Not quite heir apparent, not quite the treasured daughter. I was the reliable one, the fixer, the mediator. While James learned the business and Catherine charmed her way through life, I earned my law degree and joined Montgomery Developments as chief legal counsel. I worked twice as hard as either of my siblings, drafting contracts until midnight, navigating complex negotiations, quietly shoring up the legal foundation of our family's legacy. "Good work, Ellie," Father would say, barely glancing at the contracts I had spent weeks perfecting. The same contracts that protected the company from millions in potential liability. The same day, he would praise James effusively for a simple acquisition that I had actually structured behind the scenes. I told myself it did not matter. We were family, and we all played our parts. Mother died when I was 32, pancreatic cancer that moved with cruel efficiency. Her loss shattered our family's equilibrium in ways I had not anticipated. Father, always stoic, retreated further into himself and his work. James, who had adored our mother, began drinking too much and showing up to important meetings unprepared. Catherine fell apart completely, requiring constant emotional support that, predictably, fell to me to provide. 6 months after Mother's funeral, Father called a family meeting in his oak-paneled study. We gathered around his massive desk, James nursing a hangover, Catherine red-eyed from crying, and me with a legal pad, prepared as always to take notes and solve problems. "I've made some changes to my will and the company succession plan," Father announced without preamble. "In light of recent events, I believe it's time to firmly establish the future of Montgomery Developments." I remember the weight of anticipation in that room. James sat up straighter, suddenly alert despite his bloodshot eyes. Catherine stopped sniffling and fixed our father with an attentive gaze I had not seen from her in months. "James will remain as president upon my retirement or passing," Father continued, "but with a significant change. Eleanor will serve as executive vice president and chief operating officer, with equal voting rights on the board." I nearly dropped my pen. This was unprecedented. Father had never indicated he saw me as anything more than the family lawyer. James's face had gone from anticipatory to thunderous in seconds. "Dad, what are you saying?" James demanded. "The succession plan was always clear. I'm the oldest son. And you've been struggling," Father interrupted sharply. "The Weston deal nearly collapsed last month because you were too hungover to review the final terms. Eleanor salvaged it, as she has been quietly salvaging many things lately." Father turned to me, his gaze direct in a way it rarely was. "You've proven yourself, Ellie. The company needs your steadiness, especially now." I felt a strange mixture of validation and unease. This was what I had worked for all these years. Recognition of my value to the family business. Yet I knew James would view this as a betrayal, an undercutting of his birthright. "What about me?" Catherine asked in a small voice. Father's expression softened, as it always did for her. "You'll receive your trust fund as planned, Catty. And a seat on the board, of course, though I expect you'll be more interested in the charitable foundation than day-to-day operations." Catherine nodded, seemingly satisfied with this arrangement, which required nothing of her, but offered status and financial security. Typical. James stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I've been preparing to lead this company my entire life. And now, because I've had a rough few months after Mom died, you're putting Ellie on equal footing." "Sit down," Father ordered. "This is not a democracy. It's my company, and this is my decision. The meeting deteriorated from there. James stormed out eventually, and Father dismissed Catherine and me with a wave of his hand, suddenly looking very tired and much older than his 68 years. That night, James showed up at my townhouse, reeking of expensive scotch. "How long have you been planning this?" he demanded when I opened the door. "I had nothing to do with it," I told him truthfully. "I was as surprised as you." He laughed bitterly. "Right. Perfect Eleanor, always the innocent party. You've been angling for this since we were kids, playing the dutiful daughter while undermining me at every turn." "That's not true, and you know it." I tried to remain calm, reasonable. "I've only ever tried to help you help the family." "I do not need your help," he shouted, his face contorted with rage and hurt. "I am the firstborn son. That company is my birthright." "The company belongs to Father," I reminded him. "And he's still very much in charge." James stepped closer, pointing an unsteady finger at my face. "This is not over, Ellie. Not by a long shot." He was right about that, though neither of us could have imagined how the situation would unfold. Father suffered a massive stroke 3 weeks later. The doctors said it was likely brewing for months. High blood pressure, chronic stress, genetics all conspiring against him. He survived but barely. The right side of his body was paralyzed, and his once commanding voice was reduced to slurred, often incomprehensible attempts at speech. In an instant, the succession plan became immediate reality, rather than future possibility. James and I were thrust into joint leadership, trying to navigate both the company and our fractured relationship while dealing with our father's medical crisis. To his credit, James initially rose to the occasion. He stopped drinking, at least visibly, and threw himself into stabilizing the company through the transition. I focused on Father's care, setting him up in his mansion with round-the-clock nurses and the best rehabilitation specialists in New England. Catherine, predictably, found the situation too distressing and departed for an extended stay at a wellness retreat in Arizona. For 6 months, James and I maintained an uneasy truce, bound by the common goal of preserving what our father had built. We did not discuss his drunken accusation, or the tension that simmered beneath our professional interactions. We simply did what Montgomerys always did: carried on, kept up appearances, handled things. It was Catherine who upset this fragile balance when she returned from her retreat, sun-kissed and seemingly rejuvenated. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she announced at the first family dinner since Father's stroke. We were gathered in the mansion's dining room, Father seated at the head of the table in his wheelchair, attended by a nurse who quietly assisted him with his pureed meal. James and I exchanged glances, Catherine thinking, usually preceded some new expensive hobby or ill-advised relationship. "I want to be more involved in the company," she declared. "I've realized it's time I took my place in the family business." I nearly choked on my wine. In 30 years, Catherine had never shown the slightest interest in Montgomery developments beyond ensuring her quarterly distributions arrived on time. "That's unexpected," I managed to say. James was less diplomatic. "What exactly do you think you would do, Catty? You have no experience, no relevant education." "I have a seat on the board," she interrupted, as Father arranged. "And I have ideas. The Montgomery Foundation needs direction. We should be more strategic with our charitable giving, build our social impact profile." "The foundation is a tax strategy," James said bluntly. "It's not meant to be your personal philanthropic playground." Catherine's face fell. "That's so cynical. Father always said our wealth came with responsibility to give back." She turned to our father, whose expression was difficult to read since the stroke. "Did not you, Daddy?" Father made a sound that might have been agreement. The nurse wiped a bit of drool from his chin. "I think it's a good idea," I said carefully, earning a glare from James. "Catherine should be more involved. The foundation could use fresh energy, and it would take some pressure off us during this transition." What I did not say was that giving Catherine a project might keep her from interfering in more critical aspects of the business. She had a history of well-intentioned meddling that inevitably created messes for me to clean up. "Fine," James conceded, clearly calculating that this was not a battle worth fighting. "You can chair the foundation board. Eleanor can help you get up to speed." Catherine beamed, immediately launching into grand visions of galas and donor recognition programs. I half listened, watching father instead. There was something in his eyes, a sadness perhaps or resignation. For a man who had ruled his business and family with absolute authority, this diminished existence must have been torture. Over the next few months, I juggled my expanding responsibilities at Montgomery Developments with teaching Catherine the basics of foundation governance. To my surprise, she applied herself with unprecedented focus. She hired a respected consultant to audit our giving strategies, assembled a talented staff, and began rebuilding the foundation as something more than the corporate afterthought it had always been. James remained skeptical, but was too busy with a major development project in Chicago to pay much attention to Catherine's activities. The siblings' paths rarely crossed, which was probably for the best. Their interactions inevitably devolved into bickering, with me playing referee. Father's condition, meanwhile, showed marginal improvement. He regained some movement in his arm and leg, and his speech became clearer, though nowhere near his former eloquence. What troubled me more than his physical limitations was the change in his demeanor. The commanding presence that had defined Richard Montgomery was gone, replaced by a withdrawn, often confused old man who seemed haunted by thoughts he could not articulate. One evening, as I sat with him in his study reviewing some routine legal documents, he gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Ellie," he said with unusual clarity. "Papers. Safe. You need." "What papers?" I asked gently. "The company documents. They're all in order, I promise." He shook his head in frustration. "My safe. Behind." He gestured weakly toward the painting of our mother that hung on the wall. I knew about the wall safe. All three of us children did, though its contents had always been off limits. "You want me to get something from your safe?" He nodded emphatically. "Do you remember the combination?" I asked. With painful slowness, he recited a series of numbers, which I carefully noted. Then he seemed to exhaust his communicative energy, slumping back in his wheelchair and closing his eyes. I waited until the house was quiet that night before entering the study again. The safe was indeed behind my mother's portrait, just as I had always known. The combination worked on the first try, and the heavy door swung open to reveal several stacks of documents, some cash, and my mother's jewelry collection. On top was a thick envelope with my name written in my father's bold handwriting. Inside, I found a letter dated 2 days before his stroke, and a set of legal documents. My hands trembled as I read his words. "My dearest Eleanor, asterisk if you are reading this, circumstances have forced my hand sooner than I intended. I have always counted on your discretion and strength, which is why these documents come to you rather than your siblings, asterisk. Asterisk the enclosed papers reveal the truth about James's position at Montgomery Developments. While he is my son and I love him, his erratic behavior and decision-making have put our family legacy at risk. The recent changes to my will and succession plan were not made on a whim, but after discovering that James has been systematically embezzling from the company for over 3 years, asterisk. Asterisk the evidence is conclusive and damning. The forensic accounting reports are included. He has stolen approximately $4.2 million to cover gambling debts and support a lifestyle far beyond even his generous salary and distributions, asterisk. Asterisk I had planned to confront him privately and arrange for restitution and treatment for his obvious addiction issues. Now that responsibility falls to you. How you handle this will determine the future of Montgomery Developments and our family, asterisk. Asterisk Catherine cannot know. This would destroy her image of her brother, and she is too fragile to bear it. As for legal consequences, I leave that difficult decision in your capable hands, asterisk. Asterisk I have always been harder on you than your siblings, not because I loved you less, but because I recognized in you the true strength of the Montgomery line. You are the one I trust to do what must be done, asterisk. With love and confidence, Father. I sat on the floor of my father's study until dawn, reading and rereading the letter, and examining the meticulous evidence he had compiled. The documentation was irrefutable: bank transfers, falsified expense reports, manipulated project budgets, all traced back to accounts controlled by James. For the first time in my life, I had no immediate solution, no clear path forward. The right thing, legally speaking, was obvious. Confront James, demand restitution, report the crime if necessary. But this was my brother, my family, and there was father to consider, already so diminished, and Catherine, who worshipped her big brother despite his flaws. In the end, I did what Eleanor Montgomery always did. I put the documents back in the safe, went home, showered, changed into a fresh suit, and went to work as if nothing had happened. I needed time to think, to plan, to find a solution that would cause the least damage to what remained of our family. For 2 weeks, I carried the secret like a stone in my chest. I watched James in meetings with new eyes, noting his occasional nervousness when financial reports were discussed, the way he deflected certain questions to the CFO. Had I not known what I was looking for, I would never have noticed these small tells. He had always been convincing, the charming, confident face of Montgomery developments. I was still deliberating my approach when the decision was abruptly taken out of my hands. Catherine burst into my office without knocking, her face white with shock. "Have you seen this?" she demanded, throwing a folder onto my desk. Inside were copies of some of the same documents I had found in Father's safe. Evidence of James's embezzlement, though not the complete set. My blood ran cold. "Where did you get these?" I asked carefully. "They were delivered to the foundation office this morning. No sender information." Her eyes searched my face. "Please tell me these are fake. Some kind of horrible mistake." I could not lie to her. Not with the evidence literally on the table between us. "They're real, Catty. I recently found out myself." Her face crumpled. "But why? How could he do this to Father? To us?" "I believe he has a gambling problem," I said gently. This was not about greed so much as desperation. Catherine sank into the chair across from me, tears streaming down her face. "What are we going to do? If this gets out, it will destroy the company, everything Father built." "We need to confront James," I said. "Figure out a way to handle this internally if possible." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Should we tell Father?" "No," I said firmly. "His health is too fragile. This would only set back his recovery." I did not add that Father already knew. That was a complexity Catherine did not need to process at the moment. We agreed to meet James for dinner that evening at my home, away from both the office and the family mansion. Catherine insisted on being present, despite my concerns about her emotional state. "He's my brother too," she said with uncharacteristic firmness. "I have a right to hear what he has to say for himself." James arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, bringing an expensive bottle of wine, and his usual easy smile. That smile faltered when he saw Catherine's red-rimmed eyes and my grim expression. "What's going on?" he asked, setting down the wine. "Has something happened to Dad?" "Father is fine," I said. "Please sit down, James." He complied, wariness replacing confusion on his face. I placed the folder of evidence on the coffee table between us. "We know about the money," I said simply. "All of it." James stared at the folder but did not open it. A series of emotions crossed his face too quickly to process. Shock, guilt, fear. Then finally settling into cold anger. "Who else knows?" he asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "Just us," I assured him. "And Father. He discovered it before his stroke." James closed his eyes briefly. "So that's why he changed the succession plan." "Yes." Catherine was shaking. "How could you, James? What were you thinking?" He laughed humorlessly. "I was thinking I could fix it before anyone found out. Make some big deals, recover the losses." "By gambling more?" I asked incredulously. "That's addict logic, James." His face hardened. "Do not psychoanalyze me, Eleanor. You have no idea what pressures I've been under." "I know exactly what pressures you've been under," I countered. "I've been right there with you. I just did not steal from our family business to cope with them." Catherine made a small wounded sound. Her distress seemed to penetrate James's defensive shell, and his expression softened. "I'm sorry, Catty," he said. "I never meant for any of this to touch you." "It touches all of us," I pointed out. "Every member of this family, every employee of Montgomery Developments, every investor who trusted us." James ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. "What happens now? Are you turning me in?" The question hung in the air between us. Catherine looked at me, clearly relieved that this decision would fall to me, as the difficult ones always did. That depends, I said carefully. Are you willing to get help? Real help for your gambling addiction? He nodded, the fight seeming to drain out of him. Yes, I know I need it. And will you resign as president, at least temporarily? This was clearly harder for him to accept. The company presidency had been his identity for so long. You want to push me out completely? Not completely, I said. But you cannot remain in control of company finances. Surely you see that. After a long moment he nodded again. And what about the money? You'll need to pay it back, I said firmly. Every penny. We'll structure it as a personal loan from your inheritance if necessary. But the company must be made whole. Catherine, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. I'll cover half. We both turned to her in surprise. My trust fund, she explained. I'll use it to cover half of what James owes. He can pay back the rest over time. Catherine, no, James protested. This is my mistake. We're family, she said simply. Montgomerys take care of their own, remember? That's what Father always said. I felt a surge of unexpected pride in my younger sister. Behind the fragile exterior was a backbone I had not given her credit for. Over the next several hours, we hammered out the details of what amounted to a family settlement. James would seek treatment for his gambling addiction, step down as president while retaining a board seat, and work with me to gradually repay the embezzled funds. I would assume the presidency, with Catherine taking on a larger role in both the company and foundation. We should bring in an outside CFO, I suggested. Someone with no family ties, who reports directly to the board. James winced but agreed. Probably wise. By the time James left my home that night, we had a plan. Not a perfect one, and certainly not one that would be without pain in the coming months, but a path forward that might preserve both the company and some version of our family unity. I visited Father the next day to update him, speaking clearly despite uncertainty about how much he comprehended. He listened intently, and when I finished explaining our solution, he reached for my hand. Knew you would, he said, the words slightly slurred but intelligible. Fix it. Is that why you put me in charge alongside James? I asked. Because you suspected he would eventually self-destruct? Father shook his head slightly. No, because knew you would not. Those 5 words, delivered with effort from his compromised body, conveyed more paternal confidence than he had shown me in 40 years of life. The following months were difficult beyond imagining. James's temporary departure required careful messaging to employees and investors. His treatment program revealed not just gambling addiction, but long-standing depression and anxiety that had gone untreated for years. Catherine threw herself into her expanded responsibilities with surprising competence, but occasional emotional breakdowns that required careful handling. And I, as always, managed it all. The difference now was that I did so not from the shadows, but from the president's office, with proper authority and recognition. Father's health continued to improve incrementally. By the 6-month mark he could speak in complete, if halting, sentences and participate more actively in family discussions. He would never return to his former robustness, but there was more of Richard Montgomery present than the doctors had initially thought possible. 1 year after discovering James's betrayal, we gathered again in Father's study for a private family meeting. James was 6 months sober, attending regular therapy and Gamblers Anonymous meetings. He had begun repaying his debt to the company through structured withdrawals from his investment accounts. Catherine had found her footing as head of the foundation and was developing into a respected voice in philanthropic circles. And I had led Montgomery developments through the crisis to our most profitable quarter in company history. I want to propose a toast, Father said, raising his glass of sparkling water with his now steadier hand. To the Montgomery legacy, stronger than the mistakes of any one of us. We clinked glasses solemnly. I owe all of you an apology, James said after a moment. Especially you, Ellie. I've resented you for years, convinced that you were somehow undermining me, when all you were doing was holding things together, that I was actively breaking apart. We all have regrets, I said, finding that the bitterness I had carried for years had somewhat dissipated. What matters is where we go from here. Catherine smiled through tears. We rebuild. Together. Father nodded slowly. Family, he said with effort, is not what you're born into. It's what you choose to make of those connections every day. Coming from a man who had spent his life invoking the sanctity of bloodlines, this was a profound evolution. That night, as I drove home to my townhouse, I reflected on the twisted path that had led us here. James's betrayal and subsequent redemption, Catherine's growth from perpetual child to capable adult, Father's physical diminishment, but unexpected emotional expansion, and my own journey from family fixer to acknowledged leader. There was a certain karmic balance to it all. James had stolen from the company but lost his position and his pride. Catherine had avoided responsibility for years, but stepped up when it truly mattered. Father had played favorites all our lives, but now depended entirely on the middle child he had taken for granted. And I had spent decades seeking validation that ultimately came in the worst possible way. None of us had escaped unscathed. None of us had gotten exactly what we wanted, but we had preserved something valuable from the wreckage of our family myths. A new kind of honesty, a hard-won respect for each other's true strengths and weaknesses. The Montgomery legacy would continue, not as the unassailable empire my father had envisioned, but as something more human and perhaps more durable. Not built on the illusion of perfection, but on the reality of forgiveness and second chances. I parked in front of my home and sat for a moment, watching the lights of Boston shimmer in the distance. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt no need to solve anyone else's problems tonight. No urgent fires to extinguish. No family crisis requiring my intervention. Just the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes justice arrives in unexpected packages, and healing comes through wounds we never would have chosen. The knowledge that karma moves through families in mysterious ways. Evening accounts across generations when we least expect it. I was Eleanor Montgomery, president of Montgomery Developments. Daughter, sister, fixer turned leader. Keeper of secrets now brought to light. And finally, after 40 years, comfortable in my own skin and place in the world. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you exactly where you needed to be all along. Sometimes family is broken and remade in the breaking. And sometimes, the middle child who never quite belonged turns out to be exactly where she was meant to be. Not invisible, not overlooked, but essential.